attention of a predator and they have become injured. So they don't kind of make themselves readily apparent, but there are some signs that we can use to help us determine. So some of the kind of visual cues that we can look for are things like blood. That's really a very obvious one. But also if you see a drooping wing, so if the wings appear asymmetric in a wild bird, that can be a good indication that some kind of trauma has happened. To the bird, or if you see damage on like the feet or the bill, quite often if a wild bird has had an impact with a car or a window, they crash face first, and sometimes we'll see some damage there. So those are all things that would require some intervention with injured wildlife. We also see a fair number of sick birds coming to us. Seasonally, we'll see things like salmonella infections. And when birds are sick with a disease like salmonella, they often appear quite lethargic. So maybe they're just sitting at the feeder and looking quite sleepy. They're not flying away like a healthy bird would do. We may see them sitting there and being quite puffed up. So when birds are feeling cold and unwell, they try to insulate themselves to feel better and to stay warm. And so sometimes they look like a puffy little ball kind of sitting there, and that can also be an indication that they're not feeling great. Sometimes they'll just sit with their eyes closed and appear to be sleeping, which is also not normal behavior as a human, which they would consider to be a predator, is approaching. And sometimes we'll see things like, twitching or convulsions. And unfortunately, with the avian influenza patients that we've seen over the last few years, that's a really common thing, is to see those kind of neurological symptoms that arise as a result of that illness. There can also be some different scenarios. Abby, can I just get you to advance it to the next slide? There can be some different scenarios that you may also encounter that can help to indicate that an adult bird is in distress. So quite often, members of public will call us because they found a bird that is stuck in netting. And a lot of people will think, okay, I just need to like cut the net loose and let the bird go. But quite often, that bird has been there for a long time. So maybe they've spent hours and hours trying to fight their way out of the net. And sometimes the net also becomes really tightly entangled around a wing or a neck or a leg. And so even if the bird could be cut and freed, we always want those birds to be brought to our facility. So cut loose so that they're no longer entangled. But it's always good for them to then be transported to our facility for further follow-up to make sure that they're not, dehydrated or exhausted from that encounter. Similarly, glue traps are one of the things that we sometimes see with injured birds, and removing them is not ideal. So it's best to give us a call. And those are cases that we always want to come to us because they have to be removed in a very specific and special way to prevent further damage. Birds that are entrapped in enclosed spaces. So sometimes birds will fly onto like apartment patios and they get stuck there, especially if it's a glass railing and they can't see their way out. Sometimes they get stuck in buildings. So you may have encountered like a bird that's flown into the grocery store, for example, and then can't find its way out. So when they've been entrapped in an enclosed space, those same kind of things apply. Like sometimes we don't know how long they've been there. Sometimes they've experienced malnourishment because they haven't been able to get adequate food. So those are cases as well where we like for the adult bird to come to us. Similarly, if they've been attacked by a pet, so cats have got significant bacteria in their saliva that's quite deadly to birds. And with dogs, when they find birds that are usually already ill from something else, most dogs can't capture a healthy adult bird, but they do tend to pick them up and shake them, which can cause a lot of issues with birds as well. And anytime a bird has suffered a serious impact, so anytime they have hit a window or been hit by a car, we always want to be able to see those birds and provide them the medical care, ensure that they're stable, because quite often they can experience internal injuries. So those are the adult bird ones I feel like are a little bit more straightforward. So next we're going to talk about how to determine if a baby bird is in distress. So baby birds can be a little bit trickier because developmentally they go through different stages that are a lot different than we as mammals go through. So I'm going to talk in detail about those different stages and how to determine if those things are still indicating that that bird needs help. So some things are similar between babies and adults. So any bird that's visibly injured. So if you see blood or a drooping wing or, a leg that's totally lame, that would be a really clear case of a baby needing to come to us. Or if it's been attacked by a predator, picked up by a dog or cat. With baby birds, sometimes they get plucked by crows and then dropped, or, birds of prey will sometimes pick them up and get scared and then drop them. So those are all cases. We want them to come to wildlife rescue. But seeing them on the ground, so an adult bird that doesn't fly away is a clear case that needs to come to us. With baby birds, it's a little bit different. There's a little bit more information that we need in decision making that goes into the process because of the development that they go through. So, yeah, we've talked a little bit about the scenarios. Abby, if you can just go forward a couple there. So, some common reasons that we might find baby birds in distress would be, for example, if they're knocked from the nest prematurely. And this will happen sometimes if you've got raccoons going up into a tree, or cats that go up there, or crows or other corvids will sometimes like try to pluck babies from the nest. So sometimes they get knocked out and they'll fall down to the ground. Sometimes they're truly orphaned. So maybe the baby themselves is not injured, but something has happened to the parent. So maybe the neighborhood cat got mom, who's the only provider in some of the bird families. And so now maybe those babies are orphaned. And sometimes they're injured. And we've talked a bit about those, those kind of traumas that happen. So those are some of the reasons that we typically see babies needing to come to us. And in terms of time of year, nesting season is quite extended across BC and especially around the lower mainland. So we start seeing young hummingbirds as early as January, start to see some of the other songbirds like jays and flickers into kind of March, April, May, June. We see a lot of the waterfowl starting about now, so kind of April to June. Crows are a little bit later, April to July, and then the gulls tend to be one of our later birds, so they're kind of around July and August. And then the trusty pigeon, they breed all year long, so we can see babies at any time of year. But it's important to think about the nesting season because that's going to give you an indication of kind of that window of time when you might be looking at a baby or a juvenile versus an adult. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about altricial versus precocial birds. So altricial birds are the ones that hatch completely helpless. They're all pink. They have no feathers. Their eyes are closed, so they cannot see. And they're completely dependent on their parents for survival. So parents will sit on the nest to keep them warm. They use their siblings to be all tucked into the nest and stay warm. And their parents come to and fro bringing food. So these babies have no way to possibly survive if something happens to the parents because they're depending on the constant feeding. I mean, the parents are just back and forth all day long. They're quite different than the precocial birds that we see, which are usually like shorebirds, game birds like quail, and of course, ducklings and goslings. And precocial birds hatch much further along in their development. They've got some fluffy down feathers already. Eyes are open. And within a very short period of hatching, usually within about 12 hours, as soon as their downy feathers have dried off, they're going to start moving around and they're also going to start foraging. So they're going to start picking up bugs and vegetation off the ground and starting to feed themselves. So they're a little bit more independent, but still totally relying on their parent to help protect them from predators, provide warning for things like that, to guide them to water. Just, kind of keep them warm as well, especially when they're so little. Mom will often like kind of put her wings out over top of the babies and allow them to huddle beneath her to keep warm. So kind of two very, very different scenarios. of development in the different types of birds. Birds also develop quite differently than mammals do. And so, with the altricial birds, so those birds that are really helpless, we see some quite distinct stages that they go through. So, when they first come out of the egg, we call them hatchlings. And those are like the ones at the very, if you just go back one, Abby, at the very top of the screen. These, yeah, little guys right here who are totally naked. You can see just a few little downy feathers on the top. And then as they grow a little bit, they turn into what we call nestlings. And so with nestlings, you can see they're developing a few more feathers. Um, but they have usually kind of a stubby little tail. They're not able to like hop and jump and walk around yet. So you usually see them hunkered down, kind of like the picture on the far right hand side. And you can go forward, Abby. So anytime you see either a hatchling or a nestling bird outside of the nest, that's cause for alarm. They should not be outside of the nest at that point. So we would always try to ascertain some more information if you reach out to Wildlife Rescue about what may have happened. So we would have you look around, see if you can see the nest that they may have come from, or maybe you see the parent birds acting quite frantic. So if the nest, got knocked out of the tree by a crow or a cat, the parents might still be nearby and you might hear them calling and moving around quite frantically. But when a baby has been knocked out of the nest, the parents are not physically able to lift them and carry them back into the nest. So sometimes intervention will be necessary. So if you see the nest nearby, it's very clear what has happened, and the baby appears uninjured, and they're still warm, otherwise looking healthy. We may ask you to put them back in the nest if that's feasible, if the nest is low enough that you could reach it back in there. And then we would have you kind of watch from a distance and see if the parents are still coming back and forth, just to ensure that the parents are still returning to feed and care for those babies. And it's really important that when that happens, that you do it from a significant distance so that don't act as like a deterrent for the parents to come back, because of course they look at us as being predators. They don't know that we're there to help. And so if we're standing, within a few feet of the nest saying, oh, the parents, I see them, they're right there, but they're not returning to feed the baby, it may be because they're worried about your own presence. So moving back quite a distance and using binoculars is usually the best way to do that, just to give the parent a lot of space. And in the situation, if you're noticing injury, those are cases where we would guide you to then bring the animal to wildlife rescue so that we can care for them. In some cases as well, we would have members of public like yourselves actually build a makeshift nest. And so that often includes creating like a basket and affixing it to a similar height in the tree if the original nest is no longer viable or can't be found, lining that with some grass or other similar material, and then tucking the babies in and affixing it really solidly in a tree. And when we have people do that, what we ask is that you kind of look for those same things that the parent bird would look for. So you want it to be under cover, out of the pathway of rain that's falling, and out of direct sunlight, so that we ensure that, if it gets really hot, the babies are not going to be baking in the sun. But also if we've got a torrential downpour, that they're not going to be in the direct rainfall. And then just having it under cover helps to keep them protected, and putting it in something like a basket ensures that if some rain does come through the nest, which can happen even in a protected area, it's not going to pool in the bottom. It's just going to fall through so that the babies wouldn't be sitting in a wet, cold container of water. So as those babies continue to grow, they turn into what we call fledglings. So a lot of times people will call us and will, start to ask some questions and say, "Oh, you know what? It might be a baby, or it might be a fledgling." So we're going to ask you a few more questions, and people insist it couldn't possibly be because it's as big as an adult. And the funny thing about fledgling birds is they are just the same size as an adult bird, but there are some physical differences that you can see. So they often have a bit of a shorter, stubbier tail. Sometimes you'll still see some little downy wisps kind of poking through, either on their head or their back, depending on how far along they are in the fledgling stage. you might notice that they're moving around, but they're a little bit like clumsy. So they're hopping, but they're a bit uncoordinated. And you might also notice on their beak, here we've called them like lips. They're called gape phalanges. And you probably saw in the other pictures that they're really pronounced. So those young nestling and fledglings have these giant flaps on the side of their beak so that their parents have a very clear target when they're providing food. And those don't completely go away by the time that they're a fledgling bird because even fledglings are still being fed by their parents. So they still need that target a little bit. So they're less apparent, but you'll notice, you can see even at the edge of this robin's beak, those little yellow gape phalanges, which the adults don't have at all. So we kind of ask, a few more questions. Sometimes we'll ask people to send us photos or videos to help us discern if it's, an injured adult or a fledgling. And so at this age, at the fledgling age, these birds come out of the nest and then they can spend up to 2 weeks on the ground learning how to fly. And this varies from species to species. For crows, it can even be sometimes be a little bit longer because they're bigger, heavier bodied. But during this time, they're still being monitored and protected by their parents. So their parents will get really upset if you get too close or a cat gets too close. And their parents will still be bringing them food. So all the time when they're newly fledged from the nest and on the ground learning how to fly. And then it slowly kind of tapers off as the fledgling becomes a little bit more independent. So as they age, they'll start also like grabbing at insects and things on the ground. And the parents will gradually feed them less and less. And as they learn how to fly, the parents will start leading them to other places and kind of teach them about where to forage. So we see that gradual movement from, freshly emerged hatchling that is naked and helpless to a nestling that's got a few more feathers, but still totally, helpless and in the nest. And after a couple of weeks of development, then they're coming out of the nest and spending this fledgling stage on the ground. And I think one of the most remarkable things about birds that really, blew my mind as I first learned about them decades ago was how quickly this whole process happens. So for many bird species, from hatching to independence is as short as 3 weeks to 4 weeks with many of our songbirds. So from day to day, you can see the differences in their development. And Emma can probably speak a bit more to that because she's often dealing with them hands-on in the hospital, and it's just a remarkable process to watch. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Emma, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the species that we see.
Yeah, so like Jackie mentioned, bird development is quite complex and they go through many different kind of transitions as they grow up. And so nestlings of one species can look really, really different from the adults of that same species in some cases. And so we're going to talk you through some of the really common species that we see every single year at WRA, but also in the Lower Mainland here in BC. So one of the most common species that we get admitted to our center during the summer are American crow babies. On the left here, you can see the nestling stage of these crows. So you can see their mouths are very bright pink. They have those very bright pink kind of gape phalanges that are telling the parents where to put the food. Nestlings, when they gape, so when they open their mouths to get food from their parents, they kind of gape straight up. So you can see that this baby here is doing that for the feeder. And you can see on their wing here that their feathers are just starting to grow in. So those little kind of like white speckles on their wings are their pin feathers. So they're slowly kind of growing in those feathers. And a really easy way to tell a really young crow from an adult crow is looking at their eyes. So you can see if you look in the middle photo here for the fledgling, they have blue eyes. Nestlings also have these blue eyes, and that goes away as they age. So on the right here is an adult crow, and you can see they have very dark colored eyes. Their beak has gone from very bright pink to very dark black in color, just like the rest of their body. And another really common species that we see at WA are northern flickers. Last year in June, we admitted over 120 northern flickers, both nestling and fledglings, into the hospital. So we definitely go through a really big northern flicker season. On the left here, you can really get an idea of what an altricial nestling looks like. So those nestlings that are 100% dependent on their parents for survival. You can see they have these really bright pink gape phalanges like Jackie was talking about. They have really kind of large heads that are a little top heavy, so they don't really control their heads that well. They are very bald. They don't have very many feathers on their bodies, and they also have really weak legs, so they're not able to stand. And you can really see the comparison between the nestling on the left here to the fledgling on the right, where they are now fully feathered and able to stand and look really similar to the adult photo on the right-hand side. And looking at that nestling from the northern flicker, you can really compare that to a precocial species, or those more independent babies of the glaucous wing gull here. So you can see the hatchling of the glaucous wing gulls. They're nice and fuzzy. They have this down covering their entire bodies. Their eyes are nice and open, and they look a little clumsy, but they are able to stand. Glaucous wing gulls are what we call semi-precocial. So when they hatch out of the egg, they are able to stand, move around, their eyes are open, but they will spend a few days in their nest getting hand-fed by their parents. And this is a really cool species that you can kind of see just the massive difference between a hatchling versus an adult. They go through a pretty incredible transformation throughout their development. So these hatchlings look like little polka dotted floof balls. They are covered in down, and at the fledgling stage, they have grown in some of their like gray adult feathers, and they look very dark and gray in color. They have black beaks, black legs. Sometimes they look a little disheveled with their down kind of sticking up out of their head as they're transitioning between that down and fully feathered stage. And then as adults, they have that very characteristic kind of white head and body and gray wings, a yellow beak with that red spot at the bottom of their beak, and pink legs. And this coloration here takes gulls many years to grow. When you see a gull that looks like this, you can know that it's at least 3 years old. It takes them about 3 years to transition between this gray stage here and this fully kind of characteristic gull adult stage. And then we also have lots of songbirds, so black-capped chickadees, among other species that are admitted to our center. And on the left here, you can see a really good example of what an altricial nestling might look like if you see it on the ground. You can see their legs look really weak. They're kind of lying flat on their bellies because they're not able to stand. They have no feathers, or they might have some like little down patches. Their eyes are probably going to be closed, and they have those very obvious gape phalanges, or those like kind of like lips along either side of their bill. And you can see the really big difference between the fledgling stage once they're fully feathered and are able to perch and move around and look very similar to the adults. And then lastly, we have a species that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, the mallard. On the left, we can see the duckling stage. These species are fully precocial. So once they are hatched out of the egg, they're fully independent in the sense that they're able to move around, they're able to have their eyes open and look around, and they're also able to feed themselves. So they'll spend their time kind of following their mom while their mom protects them from predators, but also shows them food sources and water. But otherwise, they're completely mobile. And as they grow up, they'll grow into their juvenile stage that looks really similar to the adults that we all recognize, I'm sure. But sometimes they might look a little bit more disheveled. You can kind of see on the back of this juvenile's head that you still see some of those down feathers kind of poking through. Same thing on the back as well.
Right. So what do you do if you find a baby bird on the ground? So this is where we're going to, start looking at all of the information that we want to compile. So, is the bird injured? Are you seeing one of those obvious things that we talked about, like a drooping wing or, an inability to use a leg? What does the bird look like? Do you see gape phalanges? Do you see that it's a crow that has blue eyes? Those are kind of some things that are going to help you to give us some more information about the potential age of the bird and also help you to determine, oh, could this be just a young fledgling bird that's learning how to fly? Is the bird in immediate danger? So having a look around, if the bird is a fledgling that appears healthy, but it's also in the middle of the street, obviously there's some imminent danger that would need to be dealt with. Or maybe there's a cat lurking nearby. So kind of gathering all that information to see if intervention is possible is really important. And then if it's a young, hatchling or nestling, one of those birds without any feathers, can you see the baby's nest or do you see the parents around? All of that can help you and us determine what are the best next steps. Um, if you're thinking that it's a fledgling bird, so you're not seeing any injuries, it is feathered, it's hopping around, it looks pretty normal, except it's a bit naive. Maybe it's not flying away when you approach, and you've, seen some potential parents maybe flying around. In a case like that, taking a step back and watching for a little bit longer is usually the best course of action because maybe you'll have an opportunity to stand back and actually see the parents coming to and fro and actively feeding that baby on the ground. And that's going to give you the information you need to know that it's best to leave that baby where it is as long as it's not in imminent danger and continue to let it be with its parent. If it's clearly injured, that's going to be a case where we're going to guide you through bringing it to our facility. And if you're not sure, and sometimes those gray areas do exist where maybe you think that you saw a parent, but the baby seems to be a little bit sleepier than you think might be normal. In a case like that, what we would do is still guide you through bringing it to wildlife rescue, but we would do something called a health check. And Emma's going to talk us through a little bit more about that after. So I'm not going to quite go into the details of it, but sometimes we want to just bring it in and just see, okay, does this have signs of maybe being orphaned or injured and kind of further assess that situation. So a lot of information gathering. There's a lot that goes into determining kind of next steps. The next thing that I'd like to talk to you about is some of our precocial species, which can get themselves into a bit of a pickle in an urban environment. So many of our goose families will nest on top of, like flat top condominium buildings and businesses in downtown Vancouver, because a lot of the habitat that they used to use, that was adjacent to the water's edge has disappeared. And these flat top roofs provide a really good spot for them to see predators that are incoming. So we have many geese that nest in downtown locations, and even mallards. They will find courtyards and fountains and patios to have their nests. So quite often people will come across, families in an urban location that are, maybe at the corner of a busy intersection and they're not too sure how to proceed. So I just want to touch quickly on that just reminding everybody that human safety always needs to come first. So never put yourselves or others in danger to help waterfowl cross the road. If it looks like a scenario where you feel like you can safely help them, giving them a bit of assistance with crossing is fine, but just take all of the necessary steps. So if you've got a high-vis vest, always recommend putting that on. If you're at the corner of an intersection, kind of holding them in place, or like gently guarding them from going onto the road while traffic is crossing, is typically an easy thing to do. If you've got like a jacket or a sheet or a towel, you just hold it in front of them. They're not going to try to walk through that. So that can be a good way to kind of corral them in place. When there's a stop in the traffic, so if you're able to get somebody else to maybe like push the stoplight, then you can do the same thing and just walk gently behind them with a blanket or a towel and slowly just kind of push them in the direction they need to go to get to a waterway. And oftentimes in the city, we can ask, we can never guarantee because it does depend on their availability, but sometimes the police will actually come and also help with traffic management because waterfowl crossing the road can also be a hazard to the people. If people are coming and they, like really harshly step on their brakes to avoid hitting a family, that can cause traffic accidents. So sometimes we're also able to ask, like city personnel or sometimes the police to help intervene, especially if it's a very busy area. So you can reach out to us if you're not sure it's safe for you to proceed, and we're absolutely happy to, reach out to other resources and see if there's anything that we can do to support. So with that, Abby's got a little video that we're going to share about not one of the families that we assisted, but another family that was kind of assisted in this way. That the little babies kind of naturally follow her. And so by giving mom space and letting her go in the direction that she needed to go, that's a wonderful way to kind of encourage them to go in the right direction too. If people start crowding in or getting too close, that will stop the family from moving forward. And also helping to encourage people who've got their dog with them or pets to kind of back off as well and give the waterfowl family the space that they need to go in that direction can also be really helpful if you just need to kind of manage the crowd with some helpful education that can be a real lifesaver to waterfowl. Perfect. So, if an animal needs help, so we've talked a little bit about the reasons why a wild bird might need to come to us. So, what next? Where should you go? What should you do? So, I guess one of the first things to keep in mind, because we have people here, I think from all over the province, and I think I even saw somebody who is from out of province, is first of all to always reach out to your local rehabilitator. Just let them know that you've encountered this wildlife that you think needs help. Some young species, especially things like corvids, so crows and jays, gulls, are all really susceptible to habituation and imprinting. Abby, can you just advance the slide? So for this reason, it's really important that you don't try to like keep the bird at home for any period of time if you've found something that is injured or orphaned. Keeping those birds by themselves and around people can result in them becoming really accustomed to people and then not being successful when they're returned to the wild because they try to approach people, which can be dangerous for them. So just make sure that you're contacting a local rehabilitator, whether it's ourselves or whoever is near to you, really promptly once you have injured or orphaned wildlife that needs help. We also, really emphasize the importance of keeping human health protected. And wildlife can carry diseases and parasites that can be transferred to people. And, wildlife rehabilitators are trained in, biosecurity protocols to make sure that everybody is kept safe. So they're just not something that you want to keep in your home over the long term. So we always want to kind of get those to a wildlife rehabilitator as quickly as possible. So, should you need to capture something and bring it to us, there's a few things you should do to prep in advance. So, one would be to find a box. Girl Guide cookie boxes are fantastic for this purpose if you've got a Girl Guide in your family. But any cardboard box will do. An old shoe box can be great in a pinch. So you want to find the box and you want to make holes in it for ventilation. So some holes along the top and even holes along the side, so the box doesn't get too hot and stuffy during transport. Second of all, we want you to line the bottom of the box with a cloth or a small sheet. Cardboard is quite slippery for birds' feet, and so by lining the bottom of it, you help provide a more stable surface for them to be transported on. And for babies in particular, it's a little bit cozier to be on something that is soft for transport. So next, if you need to capture a bird to bring it to us, you always want to wear gloves to keep yourself safe and use a small towel or a sheet to capture them. And basically, you just want to slowly approach. It can help to kind of corner them up against a wall or a building or a fence and just gently place the towel over top of the bird. Um, Pick up the bird supporting the legs underneath and the wings against the body. Gently set them inside of the box. Remove the towel that is covering the bird. And then we want you to secure the box top. So even if the bird seems really unwell or out of it, the box should always be covered and secured because sometimes they can recover quite quickly and then they may try to fly out and either get away and not get the medical help that they need or further injure themselves, kind of, like getting caught in the flaps. And yeah, so that's kind of the best way. And then once they're contained, we would like for you to promptly bring them to our facility or whichever wildlife rehabilitator is close to you. If you're unsure that an animal requires help, please take photos and videos. These are a huge asset to us in our support center to help us discern if the animal does need further assistance. We have a web form now where you can select the scenario that you've encountered the bird. And once submitted, you automatically will receive an email with some initial guidance. And if you've got photos and videos, you can just hit reply and attach the photos and videos so that the personnel in our support center can use that to help determine what would be the best next steps for that particular animal. And so, yeah, we have people that are looking at our helpline calls and emails 365 days a year, not 24 hours a day, but every day of the year. We do have people that are looking at those to so that we can promptly get back to people who have found wildlife that they're concerned about. So with that, next up, the animal would get transported to our facility if it needs help, and then it would go into the care of people like Emma who work in our hospital facility.
Yeah, so if support center lets you know that that animal or the situation that you're encountering sounds like a situation that requires that animal to be brought to our center, they are admitted and brought down to the med center. And at the hospital, we do different kind of things to make sure that that animal is getting the proper care that they need. So when we're working with babies, right, our main priority is that we're making sure that any babies that can be in the wild with their parents stay in the wild with their parents. No one can raise and care for a baby better than their parents can. And they are more successful if they are out in the wild because their parents can teach them things that we don't even know how to start. So we will sometimes in situations where a finder encounters a baby and there is that gray area that Jackie was talking about, as we don't 100% know what's going on in the situation, but we'd rather be safe than sorry. We might ask the finder to bring the baby into the hospital where we can perform a health check. And a health check is performed, it's a physical exam that we do to assess the health status of that patient, but also to determine if we see signs of parental care on that baby. So we might check their crop to see if we can see any food that their parents have recently fed them. Birds in the wild get fed constantly, and they have this small kind of sac in their esophagus that you can see through their neck to kind of see if there's food in there. And it digests really quickly. So if we see a baby that comes into care that has food in that crop, that's a really good sign that there is a parent out there that has cared for them really recently. We might also look at their hydration status. So we might make sure that they're hydrated. Babies, especially nestlings, only get hydration from the food that their parents provide. So if they are nice and hydrated, then that's another good sign that the parent has been there recently and has been providing adequate care to them. We'll also look at like their body condition, so kind of the muscle mass around their abdomen, and see if it's like a healthy amount of muscle mass that is a good indication that they have been being cared for well for a long period of time. And we can also check them for other injuries or signs of illness that might require that patient to stay in care and receive medical attention. So, depending on the outcome of the health check, there's different things that might happen. So, if we do a health check and we determine that the baby is healthy, we don't see any injuries or any signs of illnesses, and if we see any of those symptoms that there are parents that have been caring for that bird recently, we can send those babies back with the finder to where they were found, and the finder can either look for the nest that those babies came from to put them back in that nest or set up that kind of fake or new nest that Jackie was talking about earlier, and kind of monitor to make sure that the parents are returning and caring for those babies. However, if we do a health check and we either discover any injuries or potential illnesses that may require medical attention, or if we see symptoms or signs that that patient is orphaned and has not been cared for recently, maybe they're really dehydrated, they have a really poor body condition, so they're really thin, so they probably haven't been receiving nutrients or food recently, that's an indication that they're orphaned and they need to stay in care. To be raised until they're ready to live on their own. And in that case, we'll admit them to our nursery and have our nursery team care for them. For all patients, so babies and adults alike, once they're admitted to our center, we do something like an intake exam. So for babies, we might do a health check, but for adults, if someone is able to pick up an adult bird in the wild, that's a really good indicator that there's something not right with that bird. There's something underlying going on that we need to kind of figure out what that is. A healthy adult bird should be able to fly away no problem, and it shouldn't be comfortable with people getting that close to it. So, with all birds that come in or all patients that come into our center, we do intake exams. And these are physical exams that are done to kind of determine the patient's diagnosis or try and determine what has happened to that animal, what are the injuries it might have, are there symptoms of disease, like what's going on. And we use this information to kind of build a treatment plan for its rehabilitation moving forward. So during this physical exam, some kind of key things that we're checking on are its hydration status, so determining whether or not it's hydrated or dehydrated, because dehydration can have pretty serious health effects. We're also going to be checking their weight and their body condition, because these provide us with insight as to how recently it's been eating, or if it hasn't been eating for a while as well. We'll also check for injuries, potential fractures or dislocations, wounds as well. Also, if a bird has come in due to a glue chop or entanglement, we might be checking for signs of blood loss to the area. We'll also check for feather quality. They might have lost some feathers due to whatever trauma they sustained. They might also have some like ectoparasites, like feather lice and bugs living in their feathers as well if they've been on the ground for a long period of time. And then, depending on what we're finding during this physical exam and what we think might have happened to the animal, there's a series of follow-up diagnostic tests that we can do. So in the photos here, we have the intake exam that was being done on a redneck grebe. Grebes are seabirds, so they spend all of their time in the water, and they are designed to stay in the water. So this redneck grebe accidentally landed on land instead of in the water. And because their legs are kind of set really far back on their bodies to allow them to swim really well, they aren't able to take off from the ground. So when it came in, we wanted to check for any wounds or fractures it sustained from crash landing on the hard ground. But we also wanted to check for trauma to the eyes, which is a really common symptom that happens if a bird kind of crash lands. So we did something called an eye stain or a fluorescein stain, where we stained the kind of eye and we looked under with UV light to see if we could see any scratches or ulcers on the eye. And then we can see here we're flushing out that stain with some saline. We also do this type of test for species or patients that came in that have hit windows, 'cause that's another really common diagnosis with a window strike are eye ulcers or scratches on the outer layer of the eye from hitting the window really hard. We might also do blood samples, and blood draws will tell us a lot about what's happening internally. It can give us indications of infection or if they haven't been eating for a really long time. And some really common things that we might note with babies are dehydration, especially nestlings that are relying on their parents for water and food. We might also find that they have poor body condition, especially if they're orphaned and haven't been receiving proper nutrition. And a lot of babies, especially fledglings, are very susceptible to predator attacks, especially cat attacks. So we often come across babies, especially fledglings, that have wounds from cat bites. So with all this information, we will kind of develop very specific care plans that will be unique to every single patient and the issues that we have identified from that intake exam. So every single patient is going to have a different care plan, but some really common treatments that we provide all animals, especially babies, are fluid therapy. So you can see at this top photo here, these are some robin nestlings that came to us last summer, and we're administering oral fluids on intake to rehydrate them. We might also treat any wounds or injuries with pain management so they can recover as comfortable as possible and also give them antibiotics to prevent infections. We do lots of wound care to make sure that any wounds are healing well and are properly cleaned to prevent infections. And then especially with babies, those latricial babies that aren't able to feed themselves, we do lots of supplemental feeding where we'll hand feed them many times throughout the day. So these care plans can vary quite a bit for adults to babies. For adult patients, they're usually admitted due to a trauma or an illness, right? We shouldn't be able to pick up a fully healthy bird from the wild. And so our care plan is really important to make sure that we're staying as hands off and to as minimize stress. This promotes healing as well. We also want to make sure that we're housing them indoors in smaller spaces so that they're really focused on using the energy that they have to heal. And then once they've healed from whatever injuries they might have sustained or illnesses they might have come in with, we move them into large outdoor spaces to regain strength and muscle mass in preparation for release. So this is an example of an adult bird that we've cared for last year, a Western tanager that came into our center after hitting a window. On our intake exam, we identified symptoms of head trauma, which is a really common symptom associated with striking a window. Most species or most animals that hit windows will have some form of brain swelling. They might be a little discoordinated or a little just slow and lethargic. And we set up this patient's care plan following our head trauma protocol. So for head trauma, research has shown that symptoms of head trauma can occur as much as 48 hours after the initial incident of them hitting the window. So for 48 hours, we provide lots of pain meds that will help reduce brain swelling and also monitor closely for any further head trauma symptoms. And then after 48 hours, this tanager is moved into an outdoor space for them to kind of recover, rebuild any muscle mass it lost while in care, and then was released after 8 days. With babies, the treatment options can vary quite a bit. So, like I said before, our main goal is to keep babies that can be in the wild with parents in the wild with parents. And there are some species that do really well at accepting babies that aren't their own and caring for them. So Canada geese are a really good example of parents who will care for their babies, but also the babies of other geese. In the wild, kind of geese families and parents will kind of throw all their goslings together in a group and kind of take turns watching all the babies. And so we kind of take advantage of this. If for us, if we ever receive any goslings, we try and foster those orphaned goslings out to wild families, and they're really accepting of this new baby, and then they're able to be cared for in the wild by their members of their own species. So we have a video here showing kind of the general foster process and how we make this happen. But there are some species that are a little less accepting of they're not biological babies. And so a lot of the time we end up having to keep those orphaned babies in care and raise them at our facility. So that is really common for ducklings of mallards and wood ducks, as well as gulls. And because all of these species are precocial, they're very independent. One of the most important things that we can do is stay as hands-off as possible to kind of prevent any habituation or imprinting for gulls, and ducklings can be habituated as well. And so we keep them in social groups. They are really social species. They're at most comfortable when they're around members of their own species, and they are raised with that group through their whole rehabilitation journey. And we feed them as many as 5 times a day, and we clean them at least twice a day as well in their enclosures. But otherwise, we let them kind of raise each other and learn themselves. But we will check them. We'll do like weight checks and care checks on them every few days, especially when they're really, really little, just to make sure that they're developing properly without any abnormalities. And then for altricial species, these really dependent that are fully reliant on their parents, their care is a lot more intensive and a lot more hands-on. So these are 4 cedar waxwing nestlings that were admitted to our center after being orphaned, and they were a little dehydrated on intake, so we rehydrated them. We cleaned off their feathers if they had some kind of old food debris on there, and then we moved them to the nursery. And all of our nestlings are set up in a nest structure here for them to ensure proper development. And we feed them every 30 minutes from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we have a video here of one of our nursery team members feeding these nestlings. So you can see they're gaping straight up, and we feed them lots of insects at this age. And as they grew up as fledglings, here you can see the difference from those kind of pin feathers, their feathers going in, to now they're being fully feathered and perching. They were moved into larger spaces. We bumped their feeding times to every 60 minutes. And as they grew up, they learned to fly and self-feed, and we transitioned them into larger outdoor spaces for them to learn skills such as foraging, evasion, things like that. And then we were able to release them after being in care for a few weeks. You can see here the difference. They're gaping forward toward the tweezers, and you can see their diet's a little bit different. They're getting some egg yolk and kibble for good protein, but cedar waxwings are very big berry eaters, so they're mainly getting lots of berries. And we just have a video here of a release of what that looks like. One of our rescue volunteers or release volunteers will go out to a location that has been deemed appropriate for the species close to where they were found. And then we take them to that area and then we release them. So obviously we do lots of work caring for all of these species, but I think all of us would agree that we wish we wouldn't have to. And one of all of our dreams is that all of these animals don't need to come into care because they're being cared for in the wild by their parents. And one of the ways that we can help make this a reality is to help prevent wildlife from getting into distress in the first place. A lot of the reasons why animals are becoming into distress, especially in urban environments, is because of human activity. So there's lots of things that we can do to help keep wildlife safe. One of the things that we can do is make our windows birds safe. So at night, we can turn off the light to kind of prevent glare. We can also close the blinds during the day. Birds don't recognize glass as glass. They just see the reflection of the trees in your yard. And so they think windows are clear spaces to fly into, but putting up like stickers, as you can see in this photo here, or closing the blinds during the day kind of helps break up that reflection and helps let them know that that isn't a safe space to fly into. If you're going to be putting up window decals, it's just important that you're putting them close enough together where they're able to see that that entire window pane is not safe. If you just put one decal in one area, they might avoid the sticker, but they might hit a window in a different area. We mentioned before that pet attacks are a really, really common reason for admission, especially for fledglings who spend a lot of their time on the ground and are still trying to figure out life and how to escape predators. And so there's lots of ways that we can help keep fledglings safe, especially from cats. So if you have pets and you want to take them outside, we want to make sure that you're just keeping a really close eye on them. You can use a leash, or you can put one of these collars on them where those collars kind of makes it really hard for the cat to hide and makes it really easy for the bird to see the cat coming. You can also build an enclosure like a catio where your cat is outside but not able to explore and get too close to wildlife.
So with all of that, we hope that we've taught you something this evening. So we'd love to play a bit of a game with you and kind of test your knowledge. So I was going to read a first sample scenario. And if you would like to put your hand up and give a verbal response to what you think you would do in this scenario, you can. Otherwise, if you would like to type your response into the chat, that's also possible. So if you were to find a fledgling crow hopping around on the ground with adult crows above that are dive bombing the people who walk by, but you didn't see any visible injuries on the crow, what would you do if that youngster was not flying yet? Anybody brave enough to take a crack at making a guess at what you think you would do in that scenario? All right, I see it's probably fine. I would observe, leave him alone, leave it unless it is an imminent harm. Fantastic. Yeah, this is really most of the time a monitoring situation. We don't want to pick up the young crow because it sounds like he or she's being carefully, cared for still by the parents. If it's in imminent danger, if it's hopping on the road, then maybe it would be kind of corralling it off the road. But otherwise, in these scenarios, it's usually a lot of education. So warning other people that are coming to and from with a sign saying, young crow ahead, take an alternate route can be really helpful. Or telling people to use an umbrella. So if a crow is on the ground outside of a business or an area where there's a lot of foot traffic, we often encourage people to just put an umbrella out at each end where people can use them to use when they're walking back and forth. That way, the parent birds can't actually make contact when they're dive bombing. Parent crows are incredibly devoted to their babies. And just like we are so protective of our young babies, they'll do anything and everything to keep their little ones safe. So they make quite a ruckus when people or pets are getting too close to their little ones.
So another example would be a songbird hits your window and you find them stunned outside on the ground. You don't see any visible injuries, but the bird does not fly away when you approach. Does anyone have any ideas of what they would do in this situation? Yeah, I see take to a rehabilitator, and that's the correct answer. In any instance where a bird is hitting your window, you want to bring that bird to a wildlife rehabilitator. Um, Head trauma symptoms, like I mentioned earlier, can take 48 hours before they are visible. And there's lots of instances that research has shown that even if a bird flies away initially, it might later succumb to those head trauma injuries later on. And so it's always really important that we're bringing them to wildlife rescues in your area. So someone mentioned here to put the bird in a box and call us. And that's exactly what you want to do. You want to set up that box like Jackie taught you earlier, and then contact your local wildlife rehabilitation center and arrange to transport that bird to their facility.
All right, and so our final scenario for you is that you find a group of ducklings alone in a park without mom. You see that there are other mallard families and some female ducks nearby in the pond, but just those babies sitting there alone. What would you do in this situation? I say leave alone, observe. Yeah, that's really call WRA to assess the situation, get direction, observe from a distance, monitor to see if mom returns. So, yes, it sounds like you've all gleaned a lot or maybe came with a lot of knowledge, but definitely this would be a situation where we want to observe. Um, Mom doesn't usually leave the babies for very long, but sometimes can get scared away. So if like a dog comes too close or something, she may flee, but usually she'll circle around and come back. So we want to just take a step back and see if mom returns. So watching for a little while is really great. Again, remembering to keep your distance so you're not the one that's scaring mom from returning. But mallards and most other ducklings don't readily accept other fosters. So we wouldn't want you to, for example, take the ducklings and put them with another mom because she may attack or other families may attack if it's not their own babies. So if you watch, usually we would want to give it about an hour to just see if mom comes back. If after an hour there's no sign of mom, probably intervention is going to be required. But ducklings can be very difficult to capture. There's often like 12 or 13 of them. And when you go nearby, they will scatter in every direction. So it's often a case where multiple people are required and often a skilled rescue volunteer. So this would be a case where after you've observed that for that hour, no mom has returned, it would be best to let us know that, and then we can determine if we can guide you on containing the babies, or if we have a rescue personnel available to send out, then we would probably try to support in that way. Well done, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Emma. That was really insightful. Now we'll open up the floor for any questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat last minute right now. We did get a question about what to do if there's no rehab close by. Do you just call? Jackie, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, I would say even if there's not somebody who's near to you, I mean, we certainly provide advice to people across the province and sometimes even across the country. And sometimes it is just, that more information is needed. Sometimes we can find through the networks that we're familiar with. Sometimes we can find somebody who's closer. And even somebody in your province who might seem to be really far, they may have, especially in rural areas, a transportation like volunteer network that they can use if the animal needs to come to you. So I do still always recommend reaching out to a rehabilitator, even if they're not close to you, because most people will do their best to help you determine the next best steps that are going to help that animal.
And then we received another question. What should you do if you see a fledgling crash bad enough that they're not moving or breathing?
Yeah, that sounds like a significant injury. And so, in that case, taking the steps to put on your gloves and get them into a secure box and get them to a wildlife rehabilitator would definitely be advisable.
Thank you. If there's any other questions, feel free to pop them in, and then we'll just slowly start wrapping up. Abby, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, if you are willing to review all the information you heard tonight, we have our free Wildlife in Distress ebook available. You can scan the QR code on the slide or go to the link below. It's a totally free resource for you to use and download and print if you'd like. I see we got a few more questions, so I'll just jump back to the questions real quick. Many people bring birds that are suspected to be ill or injured, think going to a small animal vet. Is this the right choice? Are small vets in contact with wildlife facilities?
Yeah, so it really depends on the area and often the relationship between vets and rehabilitators. Some of them are very closely networked. Sometimes, vet facilities are not nearby to a rehab. And so sometimes those are also the places that we refer people to in those more rural environments. So a vet, I would say absolutely reaching out to them if you don't have a nearby rehabilitator is a wise choice, especially if there's severe injury involved, because they can sometimes at least help to stabilize the animal or help provide further instructions. So I think reaching out to a wildlife rehabilitator is always the best first choice. And if that's not available, then absolutely reaching out to a trusted veterinarian makes sense.
And another question, someone's asking if Wildlife Rescue still has the drop-off space for after hours, or if it's better to keep the bird if contained in the care of even someone untrained or for safety monitoring. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do still have our 24-hour intake shed. So that is still there for the times when we are not open. I would say that the shed is a great option because it means that as soon as the wildlife techs arrive in the morning, there's going to be somebody there to assess the animal, provide the care that it needs. It's also a really quiet and warm and safe environment for them. So if that's not something that you can provide at your home in terms of a warm shed or a garage, because we really want any wildlife to be well away from people and pets. The sounds and the smells are very stressful for wild birds. And so, warm, dark, and quiet are the three most important things for any injured wildlife. So, if that's not something that you can provide at home, then the intake shed is absolutely a great option in those scenarios.
And another question, what about where a baby was on the ground out of the nest, but the parents were being mobbed by crows, a different species? Is it safe to return them?
Yeah, so in those scenarios, I would usually wait until that event is over. I mean, obviously, some predation is normal. It absolutely happens in the wild world. And, we try always our best to keep babies with parents. So that one can be a bit discretionary. But if things settle down and the crows move on and the parents are still there and the babies were uninjured, then returning them to the nest is still a viable option.
And then someone's also wondering how we get our volunteers.
Yeah, we get our volunteers from all kinds of different places that we advertise. We have volunteers in almost every different role at the organization, from helping our communications team to answering calls on our helpline, to helping in the medical center and transporting injured wildlife to our facility. So, yeah, we advertise in quite a number of places. And if you or you know somebody who's interested in volunteering, we definitely encourage you to reach out.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome to check out our website for volunteering opportunities. And then I also saw a question about different sessions, possibly on mammals and reptiles. We'll be sending out an email tomorrow with the recording of the webinar, and you're absolutely more than welcome to respond to that email with any suggestions or feedback you have. So if you'd like to see a session as such, then we'd love for you to include that in your email, and we can definitely look at that if that's an option. Okay, then we'll wrap it up officially now, Abby. Thank you. Sorry, could you go back one more slide? Thank you. So currently we have our 50-50 raffle, Save the Songbirds 50-50 raffle running. So if you would like to support the babies that are going to come into our care very soon, you can buy your tickets and also get a chance to win half the prize pot, which is very exciting. And then we just want to thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll be sending the recording your way tomorrow. And thank you so much for all your participation. Have a great night.
Thank you for coming, everybody.